Jazakumullahu khairan to the organizers and for all of you for being such an attentive audience thus far. Alhamdulillah. Before I start, I'd like to start with a couple of definitions. The first one is for all of us that are above the age of 35 in the audience about what yeet means. I had to look it up myself on Urban Dictionary after Dr. Nader suggested the title. And so to yeet means to throw forcefully something that you don't value too much. And then we'll talk about a couple of other definitions as well. Habits. What are habits? Habits are something, an action or a routine that if you did enough of it, your brain automatizes it, makes it automatic. If you think about it, your brain is the most energy requiring organ of your body, kind of like your air conditioning during the summer. And what does your smart thermostat do? It comes up with a routine to ensure that you use just the right amount of electricity so your bill isn't in the hundreds of dollars. And so that's what your brain tries to do when it comes to habits. If you do something enough, it will make it automatic so that you don't have to use as much energy for it. And as a result, you can focus that energy, that cognitive reserve, that working memory, whatever you want to call it, on something else that's important. The reason I want to describe habits is because it often gets confused with another word that we kind of mentioned, Buna also mentioned right now, addiction. Addiction is very different from a habit. Addiction is described or defined as a chronic relapsing disorder of something that you really are compulsively doing. When you think about it, it's not all that different from our relationship with sinning, right? As Sheikh Omar was mentioning earlier, we have a chronic relapsing disorder of sinning, where we'll sin and we'll do tawbah, and we'll sin again and we'll do tawbah. And the withdrawal that he was even speaking about, that's what you see with addiction as well. And so this is very different from habit. Habit is when something goes from being an action-outcome association. So you move into a new house and you learn that there's a switch on the wall that when you hit it, the light turns on or turns off. But if you do it over and over and over again, that goes from an action-outcome association to a stimulus response, where you are leaving the room and you see the light switch and you hit it. And then you hear your wife screaming, "I'm still in here," and you shut off the light. But that's because it's become a habit and you can't help yourself. SubhanAllah, I was supposed to talk about bad habits today, but I want to before touch upon something that we consider a good habit. We talk to our kids about getting into the habit of praying. And we are saying to ourselves, I want to get better with my habit of praying. Unfortunately, calling prayer a habit becomes a problem in itself. Ibn al-Jawzi rahimahullah in Sayyid al-Khatir describes this. And it can be summed up as that the ibadat ahl al-ghaflati adat wa adat ahl al-yaqdati ibadat. Right? So the actions of worship of the people of heedlessness are merely habits. Whereas the habits of those of vigilance, those of enlightenment are ibadat. And subhanAllah, he goes deeper into it. He talks about it. He said, I meditated and I thought and pondered upon the actions, the ibadat of people. And I realized that for most, akthar an-nas, they are adat, they are habits. But for the arbab, for the people of al-yaqdah, the ones who are vigilant, who are mindful, who are present, their ibadat, or their adat are the ibadat al-haqiqiyya. They are the ibadah haqiqiyya. They are the true acts of worship. And he, subhanAllah, goes into depth. And, as somebody who's a scientist, it's amazing the things he covers. He says, they think about the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala around them. They look at the sky, they look at the heaven, they look at the earth. They look at the rumman, the pomegranate, and they see the membrane on it. And they look at the egg and the fetus inside it. And they think about the fetus inside the womb of a mother. And they think about how the flesh is placed on the bones. And all of that makes them say subhanallah. Whereas somebody who is a ghafil, he says subhanallah adatan. For him it's just an ada. That he, as a habitual thing, he says that this is subhanallah. Whereas somebody who thinks about the world and the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala around them, they are driven. It's from the fruit of their thought, thamratul fikr, that they say subhanallah. And so subhanallah, when I think about it back to psychology and thinking about how can we now make our habit of prayer more like those people of mindfulness. Right? I'm going to be honest with you first. We all have those 6 to 10 surahs that are our regulars, right? Day ones, right? We started with those and we're keeping with them. Inna a'tainaka al-kawthar, qul huwa Allahu ahad, qul a'udhu bi rabbin nas. Depending on how much time we have, maybe we'll throw in idha ja'a nasrullahi wal fath. Or idha zulzilatil ardu zilzalaha. Right? That's us. All of us. But what happens is because we're repeating them so often, our brain, as soon as we say Allahu Akbar, ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, as soon as we say the iqamah and we say the takbiratul ihram, our brain just goes, okay, I've seen this before. This is known. This is a repeated action. Let's get into autopilot. And until you do Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, you don't know what you did, and autopilot has just passed you through that time. And that's why we afterwards will be like, did I read 2 rak'ahs or 3? Did I read Fatiha in the last one? Because our brain was on autopilot. But science tells us that it's possible to take something that's become a stimulus response and take it back to an action-outcome association. How? 2 things. The first one is a context change. So where you were doing something before, it could be a physical context, it could be a psychological context, a state of mind, and changing that context. And the second thing being unexpected reward. And subhanAllah, there's a beautiful hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam that covers this beautifully. And I'm going to give you a solution. And this solution I'm telling myself first. So hopefully the fear of having 2,300 people watching me say this will drive me to do this more often. But the Prophet ﷺ says, "Man qama bi 'ashri ayatin min al-kitab or min al-Quran, lam yaktub min al-ghafilin." That whoever stands in the night prayer for 10 ayat from the Quran, they will not be written from what? The categorization that we were just talking about by Ibn al-Jawzi. Ghafilin or Ahl al-Yaqda, right? So whoever stands in the night prayer for 10 ayat, they will not be written from those that are the heedless ones. And then the hadith goes on, that whoever stands for bimiyati ayatin, on 10 ayat, 100 ayat from the Quran, they will be written from the qanitin. And then alfi ayat from the muqaddirin. So the devoted ones, and then the ones that are just gathering mountains and mountains of goodness. And so subhanAllah, through even praying 2 rak'ahs in which you put together 5 and 5 ayat. This is not something that's, out of reach for all of us. We can put together 10 ayat. In some way, shape or form. It could be 5-10 minutes before the Fajr Salah comes in even. We change both the context, but because we've now introduced a few more ayat into our repertoire, we'll get maybe an unexpected reward. As Sheikh Yusuf was saying, the Quran is speaking to each one of us. By reciting a new passage from the Quran, we might hear or understand something that we didn't understand before. A new gem that we hadn't experienced before, and that knocks us back from a stimulus-response relationship back to an action outcome and makes our prayer then throughout the rest of the day better again. And it's the same thing that would apply to the rest of our prayers as well. If you want to knock your brain out of autopilot, recite something different. Recite something you struggle with. Because then there's twice the reward for you. Recite something that is not from the norm. And then, subhanAllah, that's the amazing thing about prayer. Like, even though I'm today supposed to be talking about getting rid of those bad habits, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala takes care of that in the Quran already. Inna salata tanha anil fahsha'i wal munkari wal baghi. Right? So once you get your prayer in order, those things that we all know to be bad habits, those things that we all struggle with, will be taken care of themselves. And subhanAllah, this is a reminder for myself first, but then all of you. The Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam says, "Ar-rajula layansarif." A man tries hard and does an action and works towards something, but then وَمَا كُتِبَ لَهُ مِنْ صَلَاتِهِ, that except what is written from him, from his prayer is except for ushruha. And he goes into actually the fractions, and you could teach your kids fractions from just this hadith, but it goes into sumnuha wa sub'uha, and it goes to basically, except what is written from him is a tenth of it, or an eighth of it, or a seventh of it, and sixth, fifth, half of it. And subhanAllah, we think of prayer as a checklist. Right? Like 5 times a day we've got on our to-do list, check, 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 check. And we get complacent that we've done our job. But imagine for every one of those prayers that you're getting up when it's minus 20 degrees outside, making wudu with cold water and praying fajr, and you are only getting 10% of the reward for it. That sucks. Right? Like, that would suck. So bring yourself back in. Bring yourself back in by using science. Change your context and look for those unexpected rewards in prayer. May Allah make us of those whose habits are acts of worship instead of it being the other way around. Jazakumullahu khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.